So now the establishment media is finally catching up to what many in independent media have been saying now for the last couple of months, which is Iran has been pummeling U.S. bases in the Middle East, and that they'd been doing so since the beginning of the war. But of course, we were all told, no, that's not true. The United States is pummeling Iran. Iran's totally destroyed. Their military's destroyed. Their navy's destroyed. And America has won because we're the country of war, and that's what we do. We're really mighty. But now the Washington Post and CNN, interestingly, have come out at the same time, reports that say, well, okay, yeah, it turns out U.S. bases were pummeled after all. Here is the story from the Washington Post. Iranian airstrikes have damaged or destroyed at least 228 structures or pieces of U.S. equipment at U.S. military sites across the Middle East since the war began, hitting hangars, barracks, fuel depots, aircraft, and key radar, communications, and air defense equipment, according to a Washington Post analysis of satellite imagery. So this is something that has been said from the beginning. Now they're saying, so they have hit all of these things. The amount of destruction is far larger than what has been publicly acknowledged by the U.S. government or previously reported. What do you mean by that? It's greater than what was previously reported. You mean by you? Because there were a lot of others who were actually reporting this damage. They go on to say the threat of air attacks rendered some of the U.S. bases in the region too dangerous to staff at normal levels, and commanders moved most of the personnel from these sites out of the range of Iranian fire at the start of the war, officials have said. So that goes with the reporting that many of us have talked about, which is that some of the bases are basically ghost towns, that they had been abandoned. And that is exactly what this is saying, that commanders moved most of the personnel from these sites out of range of Iranian fire. What does that mean? That means out of the Middle East, because Iranian fire can hit all the way to Israel, which is on the other side. So I would say they were evacuated out almost entirely. Maybe they went to bases in Turkey, or maybe they went to bases, the other NATO bases in Europe. It goes on to say that satellite imagery of the Middle East is unusually difficult to acquire at present. Two of the largest commercial providers, Vanter and Planet, have complied with requests from the U.S. government, their biggest customer, to limit, delay, or indefinitely withhold the publication of imagery of the region while the war is ongoing, making it difficult or impossible to assess Iran's counterstrikes. Those restrictions began less than 2 weeks into the war. However, Iranian state-affiliated news agencies, have from the start regularly published high-resolution satellite imagery on their social media accounts that claim to document damage to U.S. sites. For this examination, one of the first comprehensive public accounts of the damage to U.S. facilities in the region, the Post reviewed more than 100 high-resolution Iranian-released satellite images. So I want you to hear that sentence again. The Post reviewed more than 100 high-resolution Iranian-released satellite images. So when they say more than 100, they mean short, like barely over 100, because if it was like 110 or 120, they would say that, okay? And then they go on to say the Post verified the authenticity of 109 of those images by comparing them with lower resolution imagery from the European Union satellite system, Copernicus, I think is the name of that, as well as high-resolution images from Planet where available. So basically, they have 109 images from Iran, and they were able to verify all 109 of them. And they say the Post excluded 19 Iranian images. Okay, so they had a few more than 109. So they had 120. So the Post excluded 19 Iranian images from the damage analysis because comparisons with the Copernicus imagery were inconclusive. So they couldn't really tell. It was a little too blurry. But they said no Iranian imagery was found to have been manipulated. And these are the images they show of damaged assets, damaged military assets across the region. And it's not just Washington Post that is reporting on this. CNN has also reported on this. Watch at the same time. I mean, it's a bit suspicious that they're all coming out at the same time with this. Like they get their marching orders. You know, it's like, okay, now we can talk about the damage to the U.S. bases because why exactly? Because somebody now, the powers that be, the true, people who control the levers of all the power, want the war to end. So now they want to expose the fact that, yeah, U.S. bases are being pummeled by Iran, so we're not actually winning on this thing. So anyway, here's CNN's report that just happened to come out at around the same time as this Washington Post report.
Camp Buehring, Kuwait. American soldiers enjoying a karaoke night at one of the biggest U.S. military hubs in the Gulf. That was then. This is now. A once bustling American microcity in the desert, nearly empty and heavily damaged after a weeks-long barrage of Iranian missiles and drones. One of many U.S. military facilities in the oil-rich Arabian Peninsula, targeted by Iran even as the U.S. and Israel pummeled the Islamic Republic's large arsenal. So what impact have Iran's strikes had on America's footprint in the Middle East? A CNN investigation found evidence of unprecedented destruction. We can reveal that strikes damaged at least 16 U.S. installations across 8 countries. According to our analysis and sourcing, that's the majority of American military positions in the region, and some of them are virtually unusable now. A U.S. source familiar with the situation told us that they'd never seen anything like this at American bases, that these were rapid, targeted strikes using advanced technology. Iran's main targets? Multi-million-dollar aircraft, like this Boeing E-3 Sentry, which gave the U.S. a huge amount of visibility over the Gulf. It's out of production, and in today's money, it's worth nearly $500 million. Critical communications equipment. Look at these giant golf balls. They're known as radomes, and they protect satellite dishes vital for data transmission. In this base alone, Iran destroyed all but one of the radomes less than a month into the war. And crucially, radar systems. Highly sophisticated, expensive, difficult to replace, and critical to air defense. A second U.S. source, this one a congressional aide familiar with damage assessments, described these as the most cost-effective of the targets. Our radar systems, they said, are our most expensive and our most limited resource in the region. For U.S. allies in the region, there's a dilemma. In some ways, Iran's show of force makes the U.S.'s presence in the region even more necessary to Gulf security. But there's a new reality here, which is that U.S. military installations, previously seen as formidable fortresses, have turned into sitting targets. As a Saudi source told me, the war has shown Saudi Arabia, that's the U.S.'s longest-standing Arab ally, that the alliance with the U.S. cannot be exclusive, and it is not, in their words, impregnable. To get a sense of just how vulnerable U.S. facilities have become, have a look at this. It's the war room at Qatar's El Udeid Air Base, the theater command and control hub for U.S. air power across 21 nations. Struck not just once, but twice, and according to a U.S. source, causing significant damage. The base had been largely evacuated at this point, and no casualties were reported. Iran's visibility over its targets has never been clearer. In 2024, according to the Financial Times, Tehran secretly acquired a Chinese satellite, known as the TEE-01B, a massive upgrade from its own satellites. That means that Tehran went from looking at images of this quality to this. This is the first time America has fought an adversary with satellites that capture high-res imagery almost as detailed as its own. As the scale of the damage comes into focus, many will wonder whether America's presence, once a protective shield in the Middle East, has turned into its Achilles heel.
You think? I mean, it's been an Achilles heel for quite a while, especially for Europe when you think about it. I mean, all of the wars that the United States has waged on behalf of Israel in the Middle East has caused a flood of immigrants into Europe. So you would think that, well, Europe would wake up first, and then you would think the Middle East would wake up as well to the fact that, yeah, it's just not a good idea to allow American bases all over the place, causing wars, wreaking havoc, and doing it on behalf of Israel, that it's actually destabilizing for everybody in the region except Israel, which arguably it's also destabilizing for them. So one thing I want to point back out is this satellite imagery that they were talking about here of Iran acquired this satellite from China that allowed them to go from really blurry images to really crystal clear images. And I think obviously what this also shows us is good luck trying to fight a war with China. I mean, they just, maybe gave Iran one of these. They're manufacturing them. They have this sort of sophisticated technology. So Why are we warmongering again? Why do we think it's a good idea to mean mug every single country on the globe, thinking that we could just beat them and defeat them? We have now, it's now been proven that that is not true. And with Iran pummeling our U.S. bases using Chinese technology, it is absolutely not true that the U.S. is still the biggest, the baddest, the most mighty. Yes, we spend the most on our military, but that's because of bloated budgets. China doesn't have to spend as much on their military as we do because they control the price of the manufacturing. So when we look at their budget, we say, well, their budget is only 1/10 of the U.S. budget. It doesn't mean they have 1/10 the arsenal. It just means they spent 1/10 the money, which is not hard to do when things like a nail costs $2,000 by contractors who are price gouging the U.S. government. So we can't even go off of budgets. What we can do at this point is, this was the first time we picked a fight directly with a pretty mighty country. We had been picking fights with small countries, even countries like Afghanistan, where they didn't even have a real standing army. The Taliban didn't have a standing army. We still couldn't defeat them. So we've been picking on little guys for a long time, unable to defeat the little guys, but still pounding our chest saying, no, we are mighty, we are strong, we're the winners, we conquer everything. And now when we actually have to go up against a sophisticated military, within days, every single U.S. base in the Middle East is destroyed or damaged, severely impacted in some way.